Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Dowdall, and I would like to welcome you to the second in the Housing Agency's summer series of webinars, which are exploring the area of housing vulnerability. Our first session, which was held in June, explored key issues in tackling homelessness. And if you would like to catch up on that session, you can do so via our website and our YouTube channel. We will also have a third session, which will be coming up in September, and this will be on women and housing vulnerability, with contributions from Paula Mayock of TCD and Deirdre Cartwright from the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance in the UK. Again, links to both of those sessions will appear in the chat if you would like to attend those. But today's session will continue to explore themes around issues in the area of homelessness, but with a particular focus around trauma and addiction. And we're very pleased to have two expert speakers in this area. First, we have Dr. Briege Casey, who is Associate Professor at the School of Nursing in DCU and Program Coordinator of the Certificate in Homeless Prevention and Intervention. Briege designed this certificate in conjunction with the Dublin Regional Homeless Executive, and it is the only university accredited program in Europe focusing on the health and social care needs of homeless populations. She leads the Community Health Academic Group in the School of Nursing, Psychotherapy and Community Health at DCU, and has undertaken a whole range of research initiatives in this area, including around autism and homelessness and COVID-19 related support for people accessing homeless services. And she has published and presented widely on narrative and arts-based research, for instance, in the use of arts and health methodologies for improving health and social outcomes for marginalized groups. Secondly, we have Gary Broderick, who is director of the SAOL project, a service working with women caught up in addiction, many of whom are also in homelessness. SAOL has been operating in the North Inner City of Dublin for about 25 years now, and it is an integrated program of education, rehabilitation, advocacy, and childcare to promote the needs of female drug users and their children. And Gary has a particular interest in trauma-informed practice, an approach which he has implemented through the work of SAOL. And in addition to this work, Gary lectures in UCD and in Maynooth, and also at DCU, alongside Briege on the Diploma in Homeless Prevention and Intervention. So Briege and Gary have a lot of shared interests in the areas of homelessness, trauma, and professional practice. And in fact, they get on so well that when we invited them to speak at this webinar, they actually suggested that rather than delivering two separate papers, they would take a more collaborative and joint approach, and that they would actually have a conversation. And so just last night, they recorded a conversation for us, which gets into a really wide array of issues in relation to conceptions of trauma, how trauma is manifested, how trauma might impact lifestyles and behaviors. And in this conversation, they consider how these issues might impact those experiencing trauma, but also those who help, care, and support those dealing with trauma. And so we'll play this video for you now, and it should last about 40 minutes or so. But I should also point out that Briege and Gary have joined us here live, so they will be here for the Q&A session at the end, and they'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you might have in relation to the video. So, and just a final note in relation to the Q&A, if you do have any questions that occur to you as we're looking at the conversation, please do enter those into the Q&A box, which should appear at the bottom of your screen. So on that note, I'd just like to ask my colleague Tara to share the video of Briege and Gary. So thank you.
So maybe when we start, when we're thinking about the whole kind of, I suppose, whole experience and the whole concept of trauma, like just thinking about what does that mean? What does that mean for us, and what might it mean for other people? And, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I thought in a good conversation, as you always conversation, you have a little PowerPoint ready.
Good
So
for you. This
just
isn't one we prepared earlier.
this is what I prepared earlier, as they used to say on the two Ronnies. So I mean, obviously, when it comes to trauma, one of the things that I kind of wanted to say right from the get-go was that, you know, trauma is how an individual experiences an event or a circumstance. And that's kind of here. Let me show you this particular slide, if I can. Of course, now there it is. There we are. So with this one, well, of course, it's not coming up, as these always happen when we're doing. There we are. Now we've got it. So SAMHSA in the States, what they say about trauma is that trauma is events or circumstances experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, which result in adverse effects on the individual's functioning and well-being. And what I take from that more than anything else, and so when I'm trying to get my head around what is trauma, it's an event or events or circumstances as experienced by an individual. So let's say there's a car crash. Its impact on you might be very different to its impact on me. How did I experience it? I may experience it as, oh my God, I was involved in this car crash and I didn't get injured and I didn't get killed. This is amazing. My life has turned a whole new corner. I've got a whole new insight into how life is. You might be there going, oh my God, I'm destroyed by this. The car was a write-off. I nearly died, and I get distressed and traumatized by that experience. So it's not about, this event is traumatic and this isn't. And I think this is where, when we look back in our clients' lives and we say, well, they had the same childhood. Why is that person successful and that person has gone off to become homeless and addicted? And part of it is, how did that individual experience this? Was it there? Did they experience it as life-threatening? Did they experience it as emotionally or physically harmful? And it then results in that individual's functioning and well-being being adversely impacted upon. And that, for me, is what trauma is about. And why it's important for us to look at that is that when we're meeting somebody who's coming to our services, and we can say quite easily that they have been traumatized from the experience in their life, in childhood, in their teenager, young adulthood, in their ongoing in their adult life, then that trauma is now framing some of how they are in the world. Cornerstone of which is that when you've been traumatized, very often you are living out of the fear, the fight, flight, and freeze response of trauma, and you often do not know how to stay safe, how to mind yourself, because you start learning only to respond to the actual trauma and the experience, rather than learn like the rest of us to grow and develop and change and become the human you are to become. And so this lifting from the World Health Organization, this pictogram is just captures some of the traumas that people might experience in their life, and it doesn't capture them all, but I think it's a good kind of rule of thumb one, where war is there. And I think with war, we're talking about people coming from war-torn provinces, but we're also talking about places like the North Inner City that has had gang warfare going on, from those coming from Northern Ireland, where they had experiences of war not long ago, with paramilitary and British involvement in that kind of the Troubles. We're talking about poverty and the ongoing erosion, almost the circumstance of poverty, and how that impacts on people's lives, the lack of choices, the lack of possibility that comes from that. Abuse is often what we think of when we think of trauma, but that's both physical, sexual and emotional, the coercive control that comes of domestic violence, all that is encapsulated in there. discrimination and racism that we're only beginning to kind of grapple with in this country, neglect may not be deliberate, but that neglect that's there. Then the accident or illness, as I highlighted with the car crash, the loss and grief that will often happen when you look at ACEs, and it just recognizing, let's say, the death of a parent or the incarceration of a parent, that loss and grief that goes with that. And then kind of the bullying experience of school. And that can be online now that we're talking about the social media kind of impact. And I think what's missing there is homelessness itself as an experience of trauma. So that's when I'm asked about trauma, that's what I'm thinking. I don't know how that impacts on you, Briege. I'm going to start on this now.
Yeah, I mean, I would very much see a lot of those factors as really impacting on someone's sense of pain and trauma within their lives. And I suppose what also strikes me is that I know you mentioned, kind of these, what we perceive as big traumas, whether that's an accident or illness or injury, or abuse or some of those things. But what also strikes me is that how trauma is kind of can be ongoing. It can be smaller things. It can be things that build up, the seemingly smaller things. It can be things that happen every day that erode people's strength within themselves, that are, that people continue to get knocked down, that it's cumulative in a way, really, that trauma can build up. So I'm wondering what you think about that, that people may experience trauma in smaller pieces throughout their lives, and in fact that maybe people may not even recognize that they're traumatized, or they may not put a name on that this is actually trauma that they've experienced, because sometimes it doesn't work like that. It's two or three major things that can actually be identified.
Well, I'm kind of impressed, first of all, that you managed to say cumulative without getting all confused.
Yes.
We were having great fun last night as you couldn't say the word, so that's really impressive, really impressive.
I really had to concentrate there, Gary. You know what it is, I have a mind block about it. Yeah, I see I'm going to get cumulative.
That is it, yeah. So that build up. But I think there's two things with that. One is that we can't say what is big and small that easily or that readily, because I don't know how you are going to experience this particular trauma. And I might think that's only a small thing, but for you it may be a lot bigger. It may have a deeper meaning. It may impact on you because of the moment you are in your life, because of the journey. Our life doesn't go in this straight line. It goes in ups and downs, and we have, so if we meet a trauma on our down, that might have a bigger impact than it would if it was earlier. But I think the cumulative thing, there's me now tripping up, and this serves me right for taking the mickey of you, is that's definitely true. And I think that when people experience trauma, particularly earlier in life, and remember that trauma is not limited to childhood, but when you experience trauma in childhood, that can limit brain development. It can limit how we cope, and the coping skills that we might learn. So that then when we start meeting other traumas, which are smaller, they do build up, they do kind of pile up on top of each other, making it much more difficult to heal. And I think that's where when we're working with people, it's really essential that we're thinking about what is this impact, this ongoing build-up that people experience. And as you say, people may never have been introduced to the language of trauma, so they may never recognize. We work with women here in SAOL, and if you said, how have you experienced trauma in your life, they'd look at you as if you had three heads, wouldn't know what you were talking about. Any more than if I said, have you experienced domestic violence? Until it's explained as to what that is, they were just getting on with the challenges of everyday life.
And I think that's really important, that we actually recognize that some of the language that we use, that people may not have words for their experiences. And sometimes I think when people are living in particular contexts, that what we call trauma can be normalized or appear normal to them, so that maybe that person may not necessarily have voiced it in the same way as other people might. I think something else that you said yesterday that really struck me as well, Gary, is that whole thing of what happens to people's sense of themselves and their sense of self-worth, and how they may address trauma and difficulties, how that is actually affected by trauma itself, that can knock people's sense of being able to have a sense of a whole, a coherent whole, if you like, or a particular life story that sustains them, or some sense of order in their life. I mean, we often talk about chaotic individuals, or people, running from one crisis to the next. And I'm just wondering, in terms of that, do you think trauma itself plays a role in actually predisposing, if you like, people to that type of response, let's say?
Well, I think if you've experienced serious trauma, particularly if you've experienced in childhood, what that trauma teaches you is that you are not safe in the world, and that you are not to be kept safe. So you're not valuable, you're not important. It may not be the intention of people involved in that, like when you lose somebody close to you, let's say a close family member or a parent dies when you are 10, 11, 12, teenager. That's not deliberate, I don't think. And even if somebody dies by suicide, there's a whole lot of other things that are part of it. But the impact on the individual is that I'm not valuable, I'm not important, I'm not, the world isn't a safe place to be. And I start working out of fear and that part of my brain, and I'm fight, flight and freeze tends to be how I'm responding to the world. And in that scenario, then, when we're sitting down and we're saying, well, we need to put a care plan together, and we need to set your goals, and we need to be kind of working on what you need to be working on, I, as a worker in a sense, am presuming that you realize that you are worth this, and that you are worthwhile investing in and putting these goals together, and that you have a right to have your life changing positively, and that you have a right to home, and you have a right to stability. And if I'm actually living my life from the trauma that I've experienced, that I've never had a safety from that trauma, never been able to process it and move out of it, then I don't know what you're talking about when you're saying that I have a right to safety or have a right to a better life, because I don't believe that. I don't believe that safety. I don't believe that, because I've never had a chance to process and experience it. So in fact,
I think, I'm just thinking that's really reminding me of how and why we chose our theme for this, which is on that word of unhoused and trauma being unhoused. That people need to find a place, to a safe place to be able to work with that trauma. And if people are not able to find that, then that trauma is unhoused. It's not able to be contained. And people can spend their lives running away from that trauma and being unhoused, just as much as homelessness is an unstable kind of way of being. This thing of not being able to house trauma is also a very parallel type experience. And if you don't mind, I might share just a small piece that from a research study actually I did with some colleagues a while ago, and this was from one person, and it really struck me when I was thinking about this whole notion of unhoused trauma and having a home within oneself where we can process these really powerful emotions. So I'll give you a minute to read that, and I'm just curious to see, does that resonate with you in terms of this whole thing of finding somewhere to manage your trauma and
I mean, I just think it's incredibly powerful. And I think it really, really captures that sense of, I think, of what we were trying to say when we were coming up with this, that you know, because you have no home to go back to, because you're not at home in yourself, and you know, that confusion, that wanting something, the wanting to run away, wanting to be connected, and not knowing how to do it. You want to run forever and ever. The homelessness traveled with me, and I think, you know, part of what our challenge is to provide Desi with safety to stop running. And sometimes that is with the provision of a home, and we, you know, you know, the first intervention is let's give you a safe place to be, but part of it is that when somebody wants to run and run forever, that they may not be able to stay in that lovely space. Do you know? So we almost have to be thinking about, how do we help the person slow down? How do we help them become safe in this safe place? But remember as well that when we're working with people and they're not in a safe place, then it's virtually impossible to address this trauma. I think that's an incredibly powerful piece.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, it really struck me as well, and I think what you're saying too is that it's not as straightforward as recognizing that someone has experienced trauma. Therefore, we will provide these things, and this will heal the trauma. It's about where that person is.
Just to say one thing, because I think what's really, really important is to make the distinction. We can work with trauma without being a trauma therapist. You know, like it becomes re-traumatizing for a person if you start, you know, being their therapist and tell me about your trauma, tell me about what happens to you. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're really talking about is helping people find safety. Find a safe place to be themselves, and that's in the here and now, and any one of us can do that.
Yeah, and I think that was really interesting. I mean, again, we talked about this yesterday, and we played around with this in terms of thinking of you know, situations where sometimes people come to us and they really want to tell their trauma story, and that is what has defined them. So for example, I might come to you and say, okay, you know, Gary, I really want you to help me here. I you know, everything in my life has resulted from the fact that I grew up in a broken home, and my family were really.
For a second, Briege.
What do you mean? Stop for a second, Gary. I'm
just for a moment. Can I just ask you about just today? How did you get here today?
I don't know what that has got to do with anything, Gary. I mean, I got here on the, you know, the number 42 bus, like, you know.
Yeah, and I just wanted to just ask you that, because sometimes when we sit down with somebody for the very first time, we feel we have to tell them the whole of our story all at once. And I just wanted to pause you for a second to say that whilst I will respect your story and when you want to tell me, but that doesn't have to be today. And really, we need to get to know each other, and you need to check that I'm all right as well.
Well, I mean, you know, I have some buddies that come here, and I'm sure I know that you're all right. And it's really important that I need to tell you my story, though, because how can you understand anything about me if you don't know all the awful things that have happened to me, Gary? Like, I mean, how can you work out these care plans and things, you know, if you don't know all the stuff that I have suffered in my life?
Well, Briege, you know, when you tell somebody those stories, how do you feel afterwards?
Well, Well, I feel pretty shite, but I mean, you key workers, you all need to know the background. Surely you
I
need to
don't
know.
need to know. And I don't want you feeling shite when you're in here. Do you know?
Yeah, but how can I move forward, Gary, if I don't work out my past?
Well, that's a really good point, and I'm really delighted that you want to do that work. When you do that work, that will be with somebody who can help you do that work in that way. I'm going to help you get ready for doing that work.
Right. So you're not going to be that person, the therapist that goes into my past and does all that.
No, I'm not that person. That's not my role with you. What I want is for you to be safe and to be grounded a bit and to have some of your goals achieved so that you're ready to do that work. I think sometimes we go dashing into that work and we haven't really got ready for it.
But what does that mean, Gary? Like, what is getting ready for it? I mean, surely when there's all this shit that has happened to me, like, how can I get ready for anything else? How can that
One of
happen?
the things is I think that you have loads of great strengths because you've managed to get here and you're still standing after all you've been through. And I don't even know yet all you've been through, but I can see it in your eyes and in the way that you want to tell me that you must have been through a lot. So I don't need to know the exact detail, but do you know what I'd love to know is what would you say are your 3 best skills? What do you have going for you?
Well, I think I'm a very good mother, even though I've had my ups and downs, and
Right.
I haven't been able to look after them all the time.
Yeah.
That might be one. I think I'm good at standing up for myself.
Right.
And I think I've got. I think I'm fairly smart as well. I can usually work things out.
Right. So already as we put our care plans together and work on our goals and all of that good stuff that we hopefully will do, I know that I've got a smart woman who's caring and loving with her kids and who is able to speak up for herself. Now, I've learned more about you there and I'm really impressed. What's it like saying those things about yourself?
Yeah, well, I suppose it's true. I suppose I don't get to say it, and I don't think about myself that much because I know that there's so many other problems that I have to work through all them problems before I can do anything else.
Okay, I'm going to call time out on our role play here.
Yeah.
What I was trying to show with this is that sometimes you have to work hard to encourage somebody to stop telling their story because they've almost been trained to through all of our assessments and all of our gathering of information that we do, particularly of our service users, to hold back for a little while on telling that story, and maybe we can build some safety in our work, and that we as workers in the field need to be really clued in. Do I really need to know that information right now? And trauma informed practice will tell us that we don't need to know the detail of all of that, and in fact encouraging somebody to retell that story re-traumatizes. As you said in the role play, I feel shite when I tell that story, and so I'm almost demotivated from the moment that I tell you, and I walk away from the intervention feeling even more kind of vulnerable and confused.
Yeah, and I think, for me, and I suppose obviously I probably didn't make it that easy for you, but at the same time, I'm trying to, from my experience is that, people either really feel it's almost as if they've been trained into this notion that they have got to tell you the story, that, they've got to tell you their diagnosis, almost all the things that have happened, because in the world of sort of counselling and all of that is kind of the discourse that happens, that you have to sort of feed out this bit of yourself and put yourself out there before you can get the help. I think either sometimes people can be like that, and then other times people can't speak. They can't speak what it is that has happened to them. But that's possibly one version of a narrative that I think as practitioners we come up against.
Yeah, and I think one of the, we've all been told from early on, oh, you must tell the story and you must say your piece. But actually, the research that we know now over the last number of years is really telling us that that is re-traumatizing. And okay, if the person really needs to tell me their story, no matter how many times I say, don't tell me a story, they're going to, but at least they've heard me say, I'm interested in trying to ensure that you are minded here. And that might be somehow different. And I think, again, with trauma, it's about understanding, again, that people don't know how to mind themselves. I have a terrible thing of when I'm saying goodbye to somebody, I say, no, mind yourself. And it almost reminds me that when I'm talking to people who've been through trauma, that they don't know what's best for themselves. And I don't mean that in a patronizing, I'm in control of what happens here kind of way, but it is that automatic self-care element isn't automatically there. It's been switched off by the trauma.
Yeah.
And so it has to be relearned, and or newly learned if I never learned it. And therefore that's part of my role. And I kind of try thinking, well, okay, if my main role with this person is to help them be safer and to demand safety, that would be really good work done. And then they're more likely to be able to keep their new home, manage themselves, follow through on goals, because they're able to be focused a little bit more on their own safety.
And that's really interesting, Gary, what you're saying there about this thing where we say mind yourself and we say mind ourselves as well. And I'm kind of conscious of time now, and I think we're maybe thinking a little bit, it's making me think anyway of us as carers and helpers of people who are experiencing trauma, and that notion of mind yourself. And self-care, and it's like a lot of these terms that we kind of trot out, if you like, boundaries, keep your boundaries, self-care, all of these kind of things. And what does it mean? And I wonder sometimes as practitioners, I know certainly I wonder this many a time, how do I really take care of myself, or do I take care of myself? And what is my trauma? What is my piece in all of this? Why have I come into the profession I have? What trauma do I carry with me every day, whether it's from my childhood or from just going through the knocks and trials of life? And how does that rub up against or mix in with the trauma that I know and encounter between service users out in the world, or students in the classroom, or those kind of encounters? And I often wonder about, even we see sometimes colleagues or co-workers or whatever that have maybe particular service users that they find difficult to work with, or they get triggered about something, or they become burnt out, or I become burnt out myself and at times. And where is that coming from? Where all of those things? And I know that's a big jumble all at once, but I suppose it's just a way of thinking about the importance, I think, of us as practitioners being able to acknowledge and think about our own traumas and how that affects us in our world. I wonder what you think about that.
Well, I think you're the one who's done lots of the research on it, and I'd let you prefer to hear your thoughts. But I think what I say to people generally is, as social care workers or workers involved with people who have a lot of trauma, it is natural and normal that we would be impacted by their trauma. That secondary trauma or vicarious trauma is going to impact on me. And I liken it to being like, a carpenter who doesn't get splinters. If you're working with wood, you're going to get splinters. You get little cuts and bangs of a nail on your thumb. That will happen. So if we work in this field, aside from addressing our own traumas, we're going to be impacted by the traumas of the people that we work with. And let's just take that as read. because that will we will stop doing that dance. I think the piece that maybe you've been kind of really connecting with is, have we spent time with our own stories, and are we noticing the cumulative effect of your trauma's impact on me because I've had these experiences, and maybe these very experiences I have brought resiliences and strengths with me, but maybe I haven't addressed it as well, or what I thought I'd address because of different stages in my life are going to impact on me differently. And so we as workers really have to do that reflection piece. I've been doing a bit of work with Sophia recently, and Sophia Housing, and they have it built in. They're trauma informed in their approach, but they have it built in to have supervision as central. I know other organisations do that, but we have to factor into that the work that we're doing has this natural splintering effect. It's going to have an impact, and we as workers, the self-care piece, we have to find things that work, and that won't be the same throughout our life journey, because our life journey is going to throw curveballs at us. So we're going to need increased and more intensive, and then reduced. And I'm very conscious that at the moment I have two daughters, so they like play, and they like music, and they like cuddles, and all of those things. In another few years, when they are very mature teenagers and have moved on, maybe I'll have to go looking for more self-care in a new way as life. Not maybe, I will have to. So I think that exploration is something that has to be done for everybody who's working with people who are impacted by trauma.
Yeah, I agree totally with you. I think there's two things, well, at least two things at work here, and I think one is our own internal processes, let's say, in our past and present experiences in terms of trauma, and and then the interaction of that with our service users. But there's also an occupational context as well, and a particular socialization that happens in a lot of caring professions, where people become socialized that they should be all things to all people, and a sense that we can carry limitless or boundless amounts of trauma, and it's a sign of, would we call it strength or whatever we would call it, that we can actually continue to function. And yes, we have supervision, but I think what happened? I went dark there. Okay. I think that supervision, if it's about just checking in on what's your caseload this month and how many have you got and what are you doing, that's in some ways can really add to trauma, because there's an expectation that you carry this stuff, and that you don't have the space somewhere within work and maybe outside of work to be able to deal with that, and to find a home for your trauma within yourself, and find a safe place as a worker with people who are traumatized, carrying your own problems as well. And I might just quickly, not that to be going on about sharing screens all the time, but I might, because this is to me something that really struck me. I do some research, arts-based research, and in this case it was amongst nursing practitioners, but I think that this particular little piece to me really sums up how sometimes people develop particular expectations as to how they should manage trauma. And so it's a picture basically of this little glass bottle with the lid on it, and this is the explanation. This was from a nurse, and they were asked to bring in something that represented their feelings about their caring work, and this is what this nurse brought in.
mean, what strikes me is what you were saying. Supervision and people go into supervision reflecting to different professions, and maybe some professions there's more of a processing going on, and maybe in other professions they're a little bit behind in that. I think what we would hope for is that maybe the lid could be off all the time, but I know how to manage those emotions, and know what's appropriate, and be able to kind of be connected with self rather than having to bottle it up as I go into work and then unscrew it when I leave. And that's not what we want. I know this isn't why you were showing it, but I thought what was interesting was I connected with my first day in practice, and my granddad died, and when one of my grandparents died, it had huge impact on me. And again, that trauma is not what happened; it's how it affects us, and how it impacts on us. And so when we're hearing about somebody else's trauma, it's about what was the impact on them, not what the event was, and that just brings it around to what we'd started with in looking at what trauma is. I know what did you take away from that image?
Yeah, I mean, I think those things definitely, for sure. I think the other thing that really strikes me, and I don't know if I have the answer to this question, is in this account, and even the bottle and all of that, is the absolute sort of rigidity of this process. In a way, to me, it's almost like the two very separate worlds, that within the world of work and within the world of giving to others, there's this notion that that person should be impervious, if you like, to their own pain, and that gets bottled up in the whole. And even the notion of things being bottled up, there's a home has been found for the trauma, but to me the home is maybe is it too small, or is it too restrictive, or is it just a little bottle, or is that what the home is? Is there any of that trauma that actually finds its way out in the working day? And I suppose working as nurses, I have for many years, and having pretty much an absence of supervision, that what often happens is that people do keep all those emotions very tightly controlled, and once they get outside work, the bottle surely does get unscrewed, and literally, in terms of substance use, alcoholism, and there is a sense of that. I think the lid becomes unscrewed, and to me that's very there's something very metaphorical about that. What else becomes unscrewed or unhinged? If we're to use housing type metaphors again, does the home kind of fall apart then? And the trauma gets dispersed all over the place. And what is the effect of that trauma? And what is the effect, I suppose, of continuing to bottle up trauma throughout our working life? And sometimes I think, we may all have come across people who have become very maybe bitter or cynical or disillusioned. And I think it's through processes like this that can happen. But I think the other side of that, and it's not a binary opposite, is what you've talked about there, is the whole kind of building of resilience, and of at times being able to unscrew that lid even within a practice context, but also be able to manage what comes out. And manage what comes out in your interactions with another person, where you notice that your own trauma is being triggered, rather than trying to force that back down. Maybe taking a moment and saying, I can feel this in myself, I can feel this in my body, that I'm being triggered by this, or whatever word we want to use. And we may not even know that we're being triggered, but just to actually notice that there's something happening here to me while I'm sitting with this person that is something different, and I might not know what it is, but even just to note it and to actually think about that maybe a bit later.
I've been admiring all the way through our conversation, as we're coming to the end now, how you've been linking us back to the title and the unhoused element of the trauma. And I think one of the things that we haven't really mentioned, but is coming, I'm reminded in that image, is the size of the trauma. And I think sometimes when we haven't spent time with it, maybe we don't realize how affected we are or were by the trauma. Maybe we got on with things, and because of our work, we don't. That's being highlighted now in ways that's kind of surprising or shocking, and we don't know what to do with it.
Yes.
It's too big, and we haven't got a house to put it in, and that's where we were thinking, when we started this process. And I think the other piece with that I wanted to really communicate strongly is that very often I hear people and they say, God, I was talking to somebody and they told me about their story, and they told me that, their trauma. You couldn't send it to EastEnders; they wouldn't ever make it. It's so ridiculous. It was so over the top. But my God, that sometimes the trauma that our service users have gone through is so unbelievably huge that we don't know how to house that either.
Yeah.
No, and sometimes we just try getting on with just do the case management, just do the goals, just do the, but actually it's really important that we remind ourselves that sometimes our own trauma is bigger than we imagined, and we have to do that piece of work, and we don't thank you for that because it's triggered by other people's trauma. And sometimes we forget to remember that trauma is massive for the people we work with, that it's ongoing, it happens over years, it's ridiculously awful. And in saying all of that, talking about trauma is an explanation, not an excuse. I don't at any point mean for us to be thinking of, when we talk about trauma, as being, we excuse the behaviors or the way that people live their lives. When people break the law, when they do things which are socially unacceptable, they need to be, we need to support the guards, we need to support everybody. It's not that we all become namby-pamby about what, but we do need to stop and say, no, hang on. We can't have all this information. We can't realize that our service users are severely traumatized and not factor that into how we do our work.
Because I think that's a mark of respect to people, and it's a mark of our expectations of people as being agentic human beings, that people can be in all sorts of handlings, as we talk about up north, but they still have the right and the expectations from the rest of society to expect and to support them in being as resilient and as I suppose honorable to themselves, and to keep in as much dignity as they can for themselves, even though they are unhoused, maybe literally, figuratively, and emotionally. So it's about, I think it's back to that thing that you're saying as well, Gary, helping people to have a safe place where they can work through the chaos that comes with trauma or the attendant experiences and sequelae of that trauma. And I think that's really the best that we can do. And that is something that is very often very quiet and very just being there with the person. And it's not about sort of jumping in and trying to rescue people and have them talk about this trauma all day long. It's about, where are you in here and now, and how can we put a home around this and help you to gain some good boundaries around this. I think is really important.
I think we should leave it there so we can invite a few questions.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Gary and Briege, for that really engaging and really interesting and really wide-ranging conversation. So, Gary, you've just turned your video on here, so I just ask Briege as well. I just invite her to turn her video on. Here we are. And yeah, thanks for joining us live for the Q&A. So we've actually had some really interesting questions come in, so I might just dive straight into them if you don't mind, so that we can get as many answered as possible. The first question is to do with I suppose the non-verbal. So a lot of what you were discussing, in your conversation was about conversation. It was about talking, and it was about talking through trauma. But the question is, how do you take steps to ensure the environment is trauma informed for service users in non-verbal ways?
I could maybe start that one if you like, Gary.
Go for it.
Yeah, I think there's a huge variety of ways that we can do that. I think coming from the perspective of a service user coming into a service, right from they cross the threshold, it really gives a sense of whether the environment is trauma informed in the first instance. So I think the environment is really important. That people who are feeling distressed in themselves are not coming into a really chaotic environment. And obviously that's very difficult sometimes because it's the nature of some services. But, as far as possible, that the environment isn't chaotic, that it is a calm environment, that the way that people approach people in trauma as well is very important, tone of voice, even gestures, avoiding kind of physically rushing around, you being calm in oneself, and really sort of conveying that atmosphere of calm, a calm approach, giving people space, enough physical space, in terms of the distance that we keep with people, the use of touch as well. Sometimes it's appropriate, often it's not. Many people who've been traumatized may not particularly like to become in close proximity of being touched, and the way we use our own bodies around other people as well can be really important, to not making sort of thumping on tables or any of those kind of very kind of aggressive type gestures. So I think all of those things are really important in terms of non-verbals. And the most important, I think, of all is just being with the person in their comfort zone and listening, and showing all the behaviors of active listening, which is attending to what people are saying and not making too much noise. That's what I would say in relation to that one.
Thank you. Gary, would you have anything to add?
I just briefly to say that I think if you pay attention to the environment that you're creating, when I've been doing some training, one of the things I did was just to video myself going into SAOL in the morning, and just then being able to watch that video afterwards to see the space and the clutter sometimes, and the noise of the space itself. So that can be an interesting experience if you would, because we forget what our space looks like when we've been going in there regularly. So what is it like? Did we create it for our customers, or did we create it for ourselves and our safety? And I think then the other one is just how easy is it to get to your office? How easy is it to get to your space? And this will expose me for watching strange American dramas, but emergency 911, or I can't remember what it's called, 911, but they were going into a fire, and they were saying, hold on to the hose pipe, and that will be to track your way back out of the building. How easy it is for somebody who's coming to your space for the first or second time to get lost in the building, and that in itself, they never make it to your desk because it's too scary. So how do they get into your space? Those kind of simple interventions can make the experience so different for somebody.
Great, thank you. Yeah, they're very, very important factors to consider. Another question here kind of, I suppose, develops out of something that Briege mentioned in relation to touch in particular. And the question is, how much more challenging do you think sensory trauma is, especially when pre-verbal? And do you think resilience plays a greater role and gives greater hope to younger people who experience trauma?
I think, again, all trauma depends on the person's response, and I think anything that impacts sensory is going to have a big impact, generally speaking. But again, it's down to each individual person's response or needs, or wherever they're at in their life. I think the important thing to remember, I mean, I work in the addiction world, and we often use the language of once an addict, always an addict. I hope I've never been accused of saying that, but it's a phrase that's around, so it's almost like, well, you will always have this. The thing about trauma is that there's healing that comes from it, the resiliences that come, the new skills. If we can impact earlier, get in with people earlier, the effects of the trauma can be reduced dramatically. Can't change the fact that things happened, but the effects of that can be reduced. And the younger we can reach people, if we can be working with children, if we can be working with teenagers, then that's going to have a bigger, more positive outcomes.
Thank you. Briege, is there anything you'd like to add to that, or?
No, I mean, I think that really kind of sums up a lot of stuff in relation to, I mean, trauma surrounds us really, and I think it's about having that constant awareness, both in terms of our own, where we're operating within ourselves, and also how we're managing ourselves and our environment. Across all levels, whether it's sensory, whether it's in our interactions with people, in our attitudes, and in a whole range of areas. I think it's just being aware, and we call it trauma informed, but it's sensitivity. To me, it's about being sensitive to the needs of another person, and I think that goes a long way as well.
Great, thank you. We've had a couple of questions and comments, in particular in relation to training and the whole area of trauma-informed practice. So one attendee has pointed out that training should be provided to local authority staff, as they are usually the first point of contact when a person presents themselves being homeless. Whereas another attendee has asked, how as a manager they can support staff who have traumatic pasts themselves in their work with individuals with trauma. So perhaps if you have any comments around kind of training that can be particularly useful to staff that find themselves in these situations.
I might start on that one, Gary, if that's okay. I mean, I think, when we're talking about education and training, especially in relation to trauma, I think, yes, there's a load of, protocols and processes and all of that are, very easily accessible in terms of trauma-informed care. And, they are, can be very specific, and they talk about, how your environment is trauma-informed, the different, understanding of the different types of trauma, the different triggers that there might be for people. And I think, that is really important. That's really good for people to actually understand those kind of, I suppose, underlying factors, and also the very practical things that can be done. But I think I'd also be wary of, having too much of that approach that relies very much on, almost like a standard operating procedure. And I don't mean to be facetious about it, but that, guidebooks and all of, they're very important. But I think there's also a really important role in things like role modeling, in terms of, sometimes we think that it all has to be training based, but I think an organization that models really good care for workers within that, that looks after their well-being, that shows itself as a caring organization, that colleagues pick up when someone is feeling kind of a bit under the weather, or that they seem to be distressed for some reason. So it's sensitivity and awareness of everyone's needs within the organization. And I strongly believe that, if managers and colleagues are able to model that behavior to each other, then that transfers into the key worker, practitioner, and service user relationship. And also, I think, being mindful where there are maybe particular clients that are quite complex to work with, that there are systems that are worked out among staff in terms of an awareness of the emotional burden. And, I don't particularly like that word, but, in terms of the investment that might be required from different key workers for particular clients, and that people do regularly check in. And that's not to castigate various clients or anything like that, but just an awareness of different needs, and that people have the capacity to be able to say, look, I find it difficult actually working with that client at this particular time without having to disclose stuff necessarily, but that there's options for people to actually be able to say that and to be supported. So I think that's really, really important. And I think there was a question around supervision. I think really flexible supervision models, there's some people might really like the supervision model, which is about, well, you know, what is your caseload? How are you getting on with that? There's other people, you know, who may at different times even want to say, look, I would like to talk about how I'm feeling in relation to working with that client, so that there's a flexibility within supervision that allows for both of those type of approaches. So, I mean, that's what I'd say about that. Gary, I don't know if you have more to say on that.
I know we're running out of time, but I would say people are not trained to be trauma therapists. So we can be trauma informed in all of our work, just in the way that we approach things. And I think having basic training, some insight into that is kind of helpful. I know there's, there's a few program or places around the country that do it. There's online stuff, there's international training. I think what would be very good would be to talk to places like Sophia and Novus, who have been working for a long time on being trauma-informed services, and any other service. But I absolutely agree. I think the more we're talking about this, the more we're giving people the resources to think about the role that trauma plays in their own life and how it might be triggered in our work, and the role that trauma has. And our work will become much more effective in a really positive way. And so talk to each other, and managers talk to other managers, and share those resources.
Great, thanks very much. I am conscious that we've just reached 2 o'clock, but Briege and Gary, if it's okay with you, we still have a couple of quite interesting questions. So if you're happy to hang on for another 5 minutes or so, we might try work through a couple of those. And I'd just like to remind any participants who do have to leave now that it is that this session is recorded and will be going live on or, well, not live. It'll be placed on the Housing Agency's website and YouTube channel later this week. So you will be able to catch up on the Q&A if you do have to leave at this time. 2 questions are, I suppose, interrelated and are to do with the issue of resourcing. So the first question is in relation to the sharing of trauma, and can it be associated with a concern around accessing scarce resources? And the questioner means that in the context of, for example, an assessment for supported housing. And then another question along similar lines is about how concerned you both are with the lack of appropriate structured support for traumatized persons across Ireland, and to those who are in need of seeking counselling and support.
Well, I think first and foremost, lots of people who are traumatized are not ready to go and deal with it. The first point for most people who are traumatized is to assist them in creating a safety in their day-to-day experience. So it's not that we have to suddenly go and find trauma therapy or trauma intervention, because the first point is just, how do I stay safe? Lisa Najavitz, who's written a lot for women who are caught up with addiction and have been traumatized, talked about start with a self-care questionnaire type piece, where you're just almost teaching people how to be safer in their day-to-day existence, because our clients are the ones who are going to step in to break up the fight, and our clients are going to be the one who will say, I'll walk, you take the taxi. And so sometimes the work isn't always about accessing the big resources. Sometimes it's just about our own awareness of, can we help this person be safer? What we were talking about earlier in the mind yourself bit. People don't know how to mind themselves. So that is within our gift. We can do those kind of pieces of work as key workers, as people who are not trauma therapists, but are trauma informed. After that, of course, I would absolutely love that we had greater access to more resources, but that is for the individual themselves to decide that that's the avenue that they want to go. The way to deal with your trauma isn't always through big trauma therapy. I hope I'm explaining or answering the question correctly. Over to you, Briege.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think I find this as well with nurses as well as key workers. I think often that people underestimate the level of their contribution to people who are in distress. And I think sometimes, especially around mental health issues, that often key workers think, well, I'm not a trained professional, therefore, this needs to be, given to somebody else, or, and yes, absolutely, I'd agree with Gary. We're not therapists, but there is a huge amount of work that people can do, which is in the here and now, in the everyday, being there with the person, which is, I would argue, sometimes more effective than kind of a load of therapy. Not to diss therapy, but in the world where a person is trying to manage day to day, day in, day out, and who is it that's with them? It is a key worker. It's a support worker who's with the challenges of everyday life. And after all, that's what people have to get on with. So someone who knows that person really well and knows the struggles that they have, but also has an understanding of trauma, is actually the most important resource in some ways that person who's traumatized. That's the most important resource that they have, really. So I'd say don't underestimate all the fabulous work that you do every single day. And it's in minding yourself that you're able to stay fresh and being conscious of trauma in yourself and other people that enables you to be helpful to yourself and to other people. The resources are really important, but we are our own best resource if we can keep ourselves well.
But we'll definitely ask for more key workers. So
we will.
We can have our caseloads, and that means that we do much more effective work. We can attend to people better. So.
Yeah. Great, excellent. Well, thank you both very much for a really wonderful conversation and for the Q&A afterwards. I mean, I feel we probably could have gone on for 2 hours, if not more. It's such a rich field with so many issues to consider. So I'd like to thank you both very much for that. But before I finish up, Briege, I'd just like to invite you to say a couple of words about a survey that you'd like to share with our attendees.
Okay, thank you, Alex. I'm conscious that people want to be flying off, but I see there's still 80 people here. Woo! Please stay, please don't run away just yet. So what I'm going to ask is, we are in DCU in the School of Nursing, Psychotherapy and Community Health. We are planning a master's in health and social inclusion, which we get calls all the time, from nurses, from key workers, from everybody who really feel that this would be a really useful program, and we're responding to that and to other drivers at work as well, and we want to assess you folks as practitioners, as stakeholders, what your interest might be, and depending on the feedback that we get from this and surveys that we're doing with students, our current and alumni students and students who have taken the homelessness program, we will go forward with delivering this program. So if you could it's just a very small survey, it's in your chat box now. If you could actually just click into that link, fill in the survey. It's only 11 questions, and it would really help us to know, well, is there a demand? Would people see this as useful? And also, what sort of things would you like to see in a program like this? How might it help your staff or help yourself? And that would be so helpful to us. And even as well, if you could circulate the link amongst all your colleagues and people that you think, because obviously the more feedback that we get, the more likely it is that we will be able to develop this program. If we don't get any feedback saying that there's a market for it, well, there's not much point in us going forward with it. So if you want this, get into that survey, and even if you don't want it, let us know why you mightn't want it and what would be better. What would you like us to develop? Because we're always open to developing, different programs, whether they're short, long, whatever they are, that actually help practitioners. And I think as a school and a university, I think we're very practitioner focused. And I don't want to be doing big plugs for DCU. I mean, you all know we're brilliant, but just to say that if you would fill in the survey anyway, that would be great. Thanks so much. It's in your chat box. So go for it, please.
Great. Thanks very much, Briege. Yeah, so the survey is now in your chat box, along with a number of links for other resources, including our next and final session in the summer series, which, as I mentioned at the start, will take place on the 9th of September, again at 1 p.m. At lunchtime. That's Thursday, the 9th of September. And the topic for that session will be women and housing vulnerability. And we'll have as speakers Paula Mayock from Trinity College Dublin, and Deirdre Cartwright, who is the development manager with the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance in the United Kingdom. So I think that promises to be another worthwhile event. So please do join us for that. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. I'd like to thank Gary and Briege in particular for their contributions. And I'd like to say goodbye and thank you very much, and hope to see you all at our next event.
Okay. Thanks, Alex, and thanks to everybody.
Great.
Really enjoyed the session. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks,
Thanks, Briege. Thanks, Gary.